When you get into the really low divisions for the A-113 Subharmonic Generator, the output becomes sub-audio. And this is the point where you might start considering, can you use this as a modulation source? So I'm going to turn the Moog over to using its own oscillator. And I'm going to replace the envelope output going to the filter with the output of the Subharmonic Generator. Now I'm getting pretty slow, but I'm wishing that modulation was even slower. So I'm starting to run into a question of what pitch do I want my synthesizer to be at versus what speed I want my modulation to be at. There's a couple different ways I can go. One is I can go ahead and drive this from a different oscillator. For example, I already have a pitch voltage running to this disting over here. So let's go ahead and take our square wave, not from the Moog's output, but instead from the disting's square wave output. I'll remove this cable, turn down that knob just to keep things clear for now. I've got this tuned to very low octave. The disting Mark 3 and 4 have a quick octave switch. Okay, let's start bringing in a different division. If I pick numbers that don't divide easily into each other, like 23 and 24, I get this irregular pattern. Or I can pick numbers that do divide into each other and create interesting rhythmic patterns. Now, the interesting thing about using an oscillator driven from the keyboard to feed into the Subharmonic Generator is that the speed of the modulation will change to track your pitch. Now that might be a bit drastic. I don't necessarily want my LFO to go at double speed just because I'm playing a 1 octave higher note. I've got a couple choices. One thing I can do is I can go ahead and reduce how closely this oscillator is following my keyboard voltage. By default, it's doubling its pitch for every octave, but if I wanted to, I could run this through an attenuator and say, hey you, let's not double our frequency every time I play a different octave. Let's just maybe only go half as fast. So that's kind of nice, having the relationship of the speed of what's now become my LFO track the keyboard, but not in that perfect doubling frequency for every octave. Or the other alternative is to simply take an output from something else, such as an LFO. Let me grab the right cable here and connect that to the A-113's main input. Got it tuned up to pitch there. Now I can get some very slow divisions out of it. Now normally these are sawtooth waves coming out of this output. However, we do have these individual outputs, and I always recommend you have a utility mixer that has the ability to invert some inputs. So if we wanted to, we could have some fun by taking some of these outputs. I'm going to steal some cables here, and instead of treating them just as one mixed audio output, that'll be our top division, you start mixing them individually and even flipping the polarity of some of them if we want to. There we go. And the last thing I need to do is take a mixture output of all those voltages. Now again, these level controls are overridden and now are taken over by my mixer. I have just the divide by 24 turned up right now. I'll start to fade up the divide by 18 line. I can go ahead and invert it. speed them up a little bit and get them close to each other. And maybe bring up my different division here. Right now it's divided by 3. That starts to get almost percussive in nature. I can go a couple different directions. If I don't want it to be percussive, I could smooth the output of that voltage. In this case, I'll take the output and run it through a slew limiter or lag generator. Program 3B on a disting is a slew. Go ahead and take the output and plug as my input to the slew the output of my frequency divider. Here is the unslued output. Then here's the smoothed output. Now it makes sense to start plugging in some irrational numbers that don't necessarily line up to create more random, smoothed out sort of modulations. On the other hand, having those very percussive sounds, I'll take the inversion off of that, take down my slew, was interesting. I could increase my resonance. Lower my pitch. I start dialing in these different divisions and have some fun there. Or since I do have a sharp transition from the sawtooth, I could even use these as trigger outputs to trigger, say, a drum module. So let's have some fun doing that. Pull out my modulation outputs for now. Don't need those anymore. Get those cables out of the way. Take the output of my drum module, put it back into the external audio input on the Moog. Turn up the cutoff, turn down the resonance, turn the mix over to external input, put in drone mode for now. Now let's have some fun taking these single outputs and running them into triggers on the Pico drum. Let's go ahead and speed this up. Now let's bring in the divide by 9, which should have a traveling pattern against the divide by 4. I could lock them in if I wanted to. But it's more fun to have these traveling patterns. Again, I'm using my LFO as my main clock, but I could even divide down a clock from, say, my sequencer, my drum machine, or whatever my main clock is in my system. So to review, this is primarily an alternative frequency divider. Rather than producing square waves, it produces sawtooth waves. Rather than locking you into divisions, such as divide by 2 or divide by 4, you get to pick any integer number from 1 to 24. You get 4 of them inside one box. You can mix them together. You can change different presets and also different variations inside a preset. But if you think a little bit outside the box, you can also start to play around with this as an alternative modulation source, or even a really funky clock divider where you get to dial the number division and not necessarily have it follow a normal musical interval.